I'm Mia Taylor. I'm 32, and the day I found out my parents emptied my trust fund to pay off my brother's gambling debt was the day I stopped being their daughter and started being their consequence. If you've ever experienced something like this, comment below and subscribe. You're not alone. I remember the exact moment it happened. Not the theft. That was done silently months before I knew, but the moment I found out. It was a Sunday, early spring. The kind of Sunday that teases you with sunlight and the smell of tulips just about to bloom. I was folding laundry in my condo, NPR humming softly in the background, when my phone buzzed on the counter. Mom and Dad flashed across the screen. I hesitated. That hesitation said everything that I loved my parents, or at least I had convinced myself I did. But there was always a certain dread attached to them, the kind of tension you carry like a backpack filled with glass. You get used to it. You even forget it's there, until it starts bleeding. I let the call go to voicemail. A few minutes later, I got a text, "Please call us ASAP. It's about Jason." And just like that, everything inside me sank. Jason, my brother, was 35 and still had the emotional maturity of a teenager. He'd been finding himself for over a decade between business ventures that failed, relationships that exploded, and investments that were really just disguised addictions. My parents had always rescued him. Always. No matter what. While I was expected to rescue myself, I called them back. The phone rang only once before Mom picked up. "Mia," she said breathlessly, like she'd just come back from running laps. "Thank you for calling. We need to talk about your brother." "What happened now?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Dad's voice replaced hers. "He's in real danger, honey. He got in over his head. Gambling." I said nothing. He owes over $400,000 to dangerous people. People who've made threats. Still, I said nothing. We had to help him. Mom's voice trembled. It was a life or death situation. A chill crept into my bones. What does that have to do with me? There was a pause. I could hear my father exhale, like he was preparing for a courtroom confession. "We liquidated your trust fund." Silence. Not stunned silence. No, this was the kind of silence that screams. The kind that shakes your soul apart. "You what?" I said, my voice razor sharp. "It was the only money we could access fast enough," Dad said. "You weren't using it. You're so responsible. You've got your career, your condo." "Stop," I interrupted, my voice like ice. "That money wasn't yours to touch. It's a family trust," Mom said quickly, as if the wording excused the theft. "No," I snapped. "It was my trust fund. Left to me by Grandpa. Structured so I couldn't use it until I turned 35, unless it was for a down payment or a business. But I sure as hell didn't say it could be used to bail out my degenerate brother." "Jason's not a degenerate," Mom hissed. "He's sick. He needs help." I laughed. It was hollow and ugly and tasted like betrayal. "You raised a parasite," I said. "And now he's dragged all of us down with him." "You're being dramatic," Dad said firmly. "We're a family. We did what had to be done." "No," I whispered. "You did what you thought had to be done. For Jason. Never for me." They didn't deny it. Of course they didn't. I ended the call. Then I sat down on the floor of my pristine kitchen, the morning light dancing across marble countertops, and I wept like a child. I cried for the girl who believed being the responsible one meant she'd be protected. I cried for the hours I'd poured into building a life, assuming the safety net my grandfather gave me would be there. When I finally left, IT was gone. For $176,000. Money I'd never even touched. Meant for seed funding for my startup. Meant to be the reward for decades of grit and quiet sacrifice. Meant for me to gone. My grandfather, Henry Taylor, wasn't a warm man, but he was fair. He was the kind of man who looked you in the eye when he shook your hand. When he died, I was 25. I remember standing at the edge of his casket, cold wind biting my cheeks, and promising myself I would make him proud. He left us both trust funds. Jason got access to his early because he was already over 30 when Grandpa passed. He blew through it in less than 2 years. Horses, stocks, 3 failed startups, one of which involved importing spiritual healing crystals from Peru. I'm not kidding. Mine was different. Grandpa insisted it be structured with a co-trustee, Dad. I had to wait until 35 for full access. I hated it at first, but I grew to understand. Grandpa knew who we were. Knew Jason was reckless, knew I was steady. He thought putting my dad in the middle would protect me. He was wrong, or maybe he wasn't. Maybe he thought my dad wouldn't dare betray me. He didn't know just how far my parents' blind love for Jason would go. I took 2 days off work. I couldn't focus, couldn't eat, could barely think. I wandered my condo like it belonged to someone else, unsure what to do. I wanted to sue. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call Jason and tell him to rot, but I did none of those things. Instead, I remembered something Grandpa told me once, years ago, while teaching me chess. Never get mad when someone plays their hand. Be grateful. Now you know exactly who they are. So that's what I did. I saw them. Really saw them. Not the version I wanted to believe in, but the truth that my parents didn't see me. They saw a support system. A safety net. The daughter who didn't need help so they could give all of theirs to the son who never stood on his own 2 feet. That was the day I decided I wasn't going to fix things. I wasn't going to chase apologies. I wasn't going to waste another second proving I was worth protecting. No, instead. I was going to succeed so loudly they'd hear it echoing through the quiet they created when they lost me. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. He confirmed what I feared. Because Dad was still a co-trustee, and I hadn't reached 35 yet, the withdrawal was legal, morally bankrupt, but legal. There was nothing I could do to recover the money unless Jason repaid it voluntarily. We both knew that wasn't happening. I'm sorry, he said gently. But this might be your cue to finally stop waiting for them to do right by you. He was right. I took the rest of the week to clear my mind. I made no contact with my family. Not even Jason. I blocked their numbers. I needed space. Room to grieve. Room to breathe. Then I sat down, opened my laptop, and opened the business plan I'd been slowly perfecting for the last 5 years. My startup, an AI-based budgeting tool designed for young professionals drowning in student debt and predatory loans. I had wanted to launch it with my trust fund money. Now, I'd have to do it the hard way. I'd done everything the hard way my entire life. This wouldn't be any different, only this time, I wouldn't just build something for survival, I'd build something for dominance. They may have stolen my safety net. But now, I'd make sure they never forgot what I did without it. The morning after I cut off my parents, I woke up thinking the world would feel different. That maybe, after saying goodbye to people who had let me down for the last time, I'd feel lighter. Freer. But instead, I just felt untethered. Like I was drifting in open space, the gravity of my old life suddenly gone. I went through the motions that day, showered, dressed, opened my laptop, but nothing felt real. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, the blinking cursor waiting for direction. But the spark that normally lit me up when I opened my work was absent. It was the first time in a long time that I didn't have a plan. The trust fund was gone. The safety net I'd counted on for nearly a decade had vanished like smoke, handed over to a man who had spent his life proving how little he could be trusted, Jason. Even just thinking his name made my jaw clench. The trust fund wasn't a gift. It was a legacy. A message from my grandfather that someone in the family believed in me. And now it was gone, burned up in the furnace of my parents' endless, blind loyalty to their favorite child. They didn't even deny it. That's what hurt the most. No denial. No hesitation. No regret. Just the cold, entitled confidence that it was theirs to take. I didn't leave the house that day. Or the day after. I sat with the grief, as heavy and suffocating as a wet blanket over my chest. The grief of losing not just money, but illusions. The illusion that my parents valued me equally. The illusion that my hard work would be respected. The illusion that family was safe. But somewhere in that second night, while I sat alone on my couch, lights off, a glass of wine untouched on the coffee table, something in me shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was that I realized no one was coming to fix it. I picked up my phone and pulled up a file I hadn't opened in almost 2 months. Vesta Business Plan V5.1, my startup. My dream. Named after the Roman goddess of hearth and home, because I'd always imagined helping people build safety and security, especially the kind of people who'd never had it. Vesta was a financial guidance app for women. Not a budgeting tool, but a system, a companion, powered by AI, designed to learn spending behaviors, understand psychological spending triggers, and provide not just guidance, but strategy. I started building it when I was 29. After watching my best friend Maria go through a nasty divorce that left her with joint debt and a toddler. She hadn't even known how much was in their checking account. She was smart, capable, but had handed over financial control to her husband, and when he left, she was blindsided. She once said, "I wish I had something that could have warned me." So I built it. Or at least, I started to. Nights and weekends while holding down my job as a financial analyst. I'd written every line of the plan, built every wireframe for the app, and even taught myself basic coding before hiring a freelancer to help with the first prototype. I'd poured everything into it. The only thing I hadn't poured into it yet was money, because that was supposed to come from the trust fund. I had always imagined the day I'd cash it in. 35, maybe. A slow transition from the security of a salary to the freedom of full-time entrepreneurship. I had it all mapped out. The launch, the marketing rollout, even a 2-year roadmap for feature expansion and investor rounds. But now it would be built from the ground up, the hard way. That night, something cracked open inside me, not grief, but grit. The kind that comes when you realize you've been stripped of everything but your own will to fight. If my family could look me in the eye and decide I was expendable, then I would stop asking for their love. I would stop auditioning for their acceptance. And I would build a life that made their approval not only irrelevant, but laughable. I stayed up until 3 a.m. updating the plan. I rewrote every section with sharper numbers, new projections. I wasn't dreaming anymore. I was calculating. Ruthlessly, by the end of the week, I had sent out 3 investor pitch decks and 10 networking emails. I reached out to everyone I had ever helped in the finance world. Clients, former colleagues, even people I'd once mentored. Only one responded, Claire Martinez. She and I had worked together 5 years ago at my old firm. She'd left after 2 years to build a cybersecurity startup, and within 3 years, she had sold it for just under $12 million. She was bold, smart, and exactly the kind of woman I wanted to be when I still believed life came with a fair playbook. She responded to my email in less than an hour. Her reply, Zoom? Tomorrow noon. Send your deck. I barely slept that night. I reviewed the pitch 20 times. Memorized every stat, refined every slide. When the call came, my hands trembled as I clicked to join. Claire's face appeared, calm and unreadable. Mia, she said with a small smile. It's been a while. Too long, I replied. Thanks for making the time. She leaned back in her chair. I don't usually say yes to cold pitches anymore. But you? You were always sharp, thoughtful, and I'm curious because your email had an edge I haven't seen from you before. Like you've got a knife under the table. I didn't smile. That's because I do. And then I told her everything, not just the app, the market, the growth projections. I told her the story about Jason, about the trust fund, about the betrayal. I didn't cry. I didn't sugarcoat. I made it clear. This wasn't about revenge. It was about purpose. When I finished, there was a pause. Claire blinked, then slowly nodded. I invest in women who have something to prove, she said. Because they don't stop. They don't fold. And you? You're on fire. I can see it. 50,000. That's what I can do today. Convertible note. We'll talk terms, but I want in. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. Not because of the money, but because someone finally saw me. Really saw me. And didn't try to use me. Deal, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The funds hit my account 5 days later. And just like that, Vesta Technologies Incorporated was born. IT wasn't glamorous. Our headquarters was the spare bedroom in my condo that I turned into an office. My first hire was a freelance UX designer named Zoe who lived in Berlin and worked at odd hours. My developer, Rashida, was a brilliant MIT grad working part-time while raising twins. We were scrappy, underfunded, exhausted, and we were building something no one could ignore. Word started to spread. First, through LinkedIn circles, then among female entrepreneurs. We launched a closed beta with 150 women. Feedback was passionate, detailed, fierce. They didn't just want Vesta, they needed it. One woman wrote, "I'm finally sleeping at night because I know where my money's going." Another said, "This app stopped me from going into debt last month." It's not just helpful, it's protective. We weren't just solving a problem, we were creating a movement, and the momentum lit something inside me I didn't know I had. Not just drive, but peace. I stopped thinking about my parents. Stopped wondering if they'd call. If they felt guilty. If they'd even noticed my silence. Because I no longer cared. I didn't need their apology. I didn't need their validation. What I needed was already mine. IT was in the long hours. The sleepless nights. The user testimonials. The first revenue. The moment I signed my first official investor contract and deposited $200,000 into our account, they had stolen my trust fund, and I had built a company, not just in spite of them, but because of them. Because when someone you love betrays you that deeply, there's only one thing to do. Stop playing the game they designed and build your OWN. IT had been almost 9 months since I'd spoken to my parents. 9 months since they'd stolen my future and handed it to the same son who had done nothing but fail upward. I didn't miss them. That part surprised me. I missed the idea of them, maybe the memory of a mother who braided my hair before school, of a father who once taught me to change a tire. But the real people? The ones who had looked me in the eye and justified betrayal? No. I didn't miss them, and I didn't think they missed me either. Then came the email. IT was a simple subject line. Jason's engagement party. No hello. No, we miss you. Just an invitation like nothing had ever happened. It was from my mother's email address, sent from her iPad based on the awkward formatting and accidental double spacing. I stared at it for a full minute before clicking it open. Mia, we'd love to see you at Jason's engagement party on the 15th. It's going to be at the Fairmont Ballroom, catered and formal. Please RSVP. Family should be together for these milestones. Love, Mom. Family. That word again. The one they used like a fire blanket, meant to smother the flames, but never address the spark. I laughed out loud. Jason was getting married. Jason, whose entire life had been a string of short-lived disasters and loud exits. I clicked the RSVP link out of morbid curiosity. The guest list was already stacked with names I recognized, my parents' social circle, old neighbors, Jason's college buddies. And my name was included, automatically. Like I was still a fixture in their little show. I didn't reply. I didn't delete it either. I just closed my laptop and got back to work. Vesta was taking off. Our beta waitlist had surpassed 8,000 signups. After a single TikTok explainer video we posted hit 500,000 views. Claire had brought in 2 more angel investors, and we were prepping our first big launch at a women's tech summit in San Francisco. I was working 80-hour weeks. I barely slept. I drank coffee at midnight and took conference calls at dawn, but I was finally doing what I was born to do. On my terms, 3 days before the engagement party, I got another email. This one was from Jason. I didn't know what I expected, but it wasn't that. IT was longer than I anticipated. Rambling. A little too formal for someone who still said YOLO unironically. Mia, I know we haven't talked in a while, and I want to change that. A lot has happened, and I'm not the same person I was last year. Rehab changed me. I've been clean for 8 months. I'm engaged to someone amazing. Her name's Lila. She's grounded, smart, beautiful. She makes me better. I want you to be there when I marry her. You're my sister, and I want to start fresh. I didn't know what to say to you after everything that happened. I know Mom and Dad made some decisions you didn't agree with. but they were trying to protect me. I know that's not fair, and I know you're hurt. But I hope you can find it in your heart to let it go. Please come to the party. Lila really wants to meet you. There it was again. That word. Let it go. Like I was holding onto something petty, like this was a fight over Christmas dinner or who got the bigger bedroom as kids. They had stolen from me, and now they wanted me to toast the thief. I stared at the screen, every muscle in my body tightening. Let it go. Jason hadn't repaid a cent. He hadn't even acknowledged what he had taken. And yet here he was, asking me to show up, smile, pretend we were all fine. As if he'd learned something. As if sobriety was the same thing as accountability, but part of me wondered, could I go, not to forgive, not to reconnect, but to witness Tio stand in that room, polished and poised, successful and glowing, and let them see exactly what they gave up when they chose him over me. Maybe that wasn't petty. Maybe that was closure. IRSVP'd yes. The Fairmont Ballroom looked like a Pinterest board come to life. Rose gold and cream decor. Soft jazz. Champagne towers. Jason had never cared about aesthetics a day in his life, so I figured Lila was behind the elegance. I showed up 10 minutes late, wearing a navy blue silk wrap dress that hugged me in all the right places and heels sharp enough to slice through every lie I'd ever been told. I walked in alone, head held high. People turned. Some smiled. Others whispered. I made my way toward the back where the bar was my comfort zone at any event involving my family. A man in his 50s recognized me as Henry Taylor's granddaughter and started asking me about my work. I told him about Vesta. His eyebrows lifted. That's you, he said. I've heard about that app. My niece uses it. She raves about it. Yeah, I said, sipping my drink. That's me. A voice behind me nearly made me spill the glass. Mia. I turned. It was Jason. He looked better than I remembered. A little heavier, but healthy. His eyes clearer. He was wearing a tailored gray suit that actually fit for once, and he had that same wide, boyish smile that used to get him out of trouble. You came, he said, stepping forward awkwardly like he didn't know whether to hug me or not. I did. He hesitated. Thanks for that. I nodded once. You look clean. I am. That's good. We stood there in silence, the noise of the party swirling around us like static. Then, a tall woman with dark curls and a flawless white cocktail dress appeared beside him. Her presence was effortless, her smile genuine. This must be your sister, she said, extending her hand. I'm Lila. I took her hand. Firm shake. Warm skin. Mia. I've heard so much about you, she said. Your app is incredible. Honestly, it helped me pay off 2 credit cards. I'm a huge fan. That startled me. Of all things, that compliment hit hardest. Thank you, I said, meaning it. Jason looked between us like he'd just found gold. See, he said. This is what I wanted. I just want us to be a family again. And just like that, the warmth vanished. Family. That word was poison. I smiled tightly. You don't get to want that, Jason. Not without owning what you did. His smile faltered. I thought we could talk, you thought I'd show up, and it would all be fine. I'm not the same person anymore. Good, I said. Then you should be able to handle a hard truth. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so Lila couldn't hear. You took nearly $500,000 that wasn't yours. You didn't ask. You didn't apologize. You didn't even acknowledge it until now. And you're not offering to pay it back. Jason's face fell. I don't have it. Then don't ask me for grace you haven't earned. I walked away. The rest of the night passed in a haze of polite conversation and fake smiles. I didn't speak to my parents. They saw me, of course, my mother's eyes locked onto me across the room like a hawk. My father kept checking his watch, pretending not to notice. But they didn't approach me. And I didn't approach them because I didn't come to fix anything. I came to show them what they lost. When I left, I didn't look back. Not even once. That night, back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and checked the latest user metrics. Vesta had crossed 15,000 active users. We were being featured in Forbes Women in Tech next month. An angel investor from Silicon Valley had reached out for a meeting. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen, my face tired but proud. They gave Jason my inheritance, but I had built my own. They gave him my future, but I had rewritten it, and now they would have to watch from the sidelines as I soared, while they stayed stuck in a version of the past where loyalty was blind. Consequences were optional. And daughters like me were supposed to forgive and forget. I wasn't angry anymore. I was finished. I never intended to get even. Not in the way people imagine: screaming matches, social media exposés, courtroom drama. That kind of revenge never tempted me. I didn't want to humiliate my parents. I didn't want to ruin Jason's new life. That would have made me just like them, desperate to protect a facade, but I did want something that I wanted them to see me. Truly see me. Not as their daughter. Not as a fallback plan. Not as the invisible safety net they could plunder when their favorite child burned through his luck again. I wanted them to recognize what they lost. And not just in financial terms. I wanted them to feel the cold clarity of consequence. And so, I decided I wouldn't hide anymore. The week after Jason's engagement party, I updated my personal website, a page I'd neglected for over a year, with the full scope of Vesta's development. I added press clippings, embedded video interviews, investor spotlights. I wasn't doing it for attention. I was doing it because I knew exactly who would look. People talk. Especially in families like mine, where success is currency and image is gold. It didn't take long. 2 days later, I got a text from my mother, saw the article in Tech Women Weekly. Very impressive. We're proud of you. I stared at the words, feeling nothing. Proud of me. Proud now that the world was noticing. Proud now that they could name drop me without shame. Proud now that I had built something they didn't understand enough to ruin. I didn't reply. Instead, I spent the weekend finalizing our new mentorship program. Vesta had launched an outreach initiative to pair first-generation college grads with financial advisors. We partnered with 2 universities and 1 nonprofit. It was my passion project, something I wished I'd had when I was navigating college debt and imposter syndrome in equal measure. That Monday, Claire and I hosted a virtual town hall with our mentors and pilot students. Halfway through the session, as a young woman named Joy talked about how Vesta helped her create a financial exit plan from her toxic household, I found myself crying. Not a dramatic breakdown. Just silent tears rolling down my cheeks while I muted myself and stared at the screen, because I knew that feeling, that sense that you were stuck. That your family wasn't your sanctuary, but your cage. I'd escaped. But not without scars, and I wasn't done yet. 1 thing I've learned. People like Jason never stop expecting favors. 3 weeks after the engagement party, I got another email from him. This one was short. Too short. Hey Mia. Quick question, any chance you'd be willing to meet with Lila's cousin? She's working on a budgeting app and could really use some guidance from someone experienced. No pressure, but it'd mean a lot to Lila. Let me know. Thanks. It was laughable. And yet, familiar. Jason had always been like this, indirect, using charm and association to make others do his work for him. I'm sure Lila had no idea he was name-dropping me. And I'm sure her cousin wasn't just looking for advice. They wanted access. They wanted me, or rather, the platform I had built. This was the moment I realized the shift had happened. For the first time, I wasn't the one reaching up. They were reaching toward me. And I could decide what to give. I didn't respond for 4 days. Then I sent one sentence. Have her submit a formal pitch through our partner accelerator page. I never heard back, but that small act, setting a boundary, professionally and personally, felt more powerful than any confrontation ever could. I wasn't closing doors out of spite. I was building walls that only the deserving could climb. By September, Vesta had crossed 50,000 users. We were onboarding our first paid cohort. Revenue was climbing. We hired a full-time CTO. Claire was negotiating with 2 VC firms for a Series A. Everything I had worked for was finally becoming real. That's when the local paper requested an interview. Normally, I avoided press from my hometown. Too small. Too close. Too them. But this time, something told me to say yes. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the quiet, strategic voice inside me that said, "Let them read IT." I agreed. The journalist was kind, curious, and refreshingly sincere. She asked questions no one else did about my childhood, about the pressure of being the responsible one, about whether I ever felt overlooked. I didn't say Jason's name, I didn't mention the trust fund, but I told the truth. I said, sometimes, when people expect you to carry the load quietly, they assume you'll keep carrying it forever. They stop asking if you're okay. They start believing you don't need anything. And when you finally put the weight down, they call it betrayal. It ran the next weekend under the headline, "How One Woman Turned Betrayal into a FinTech Empire." I wasn't ready for what happened next. The story exploded on Facebook. People from my old high school commented, neighbors, even distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in a decade. The story resonated because almost everyone has felt overlooked. Almost everyone knows what it means to be taken for granted, and suddenly I was no longer just a founder. I was a symbol. A week later, I was invited to speak at a regional entrepreneurship conference. One of the panel moderators? A man who used to teach at my high school and once told my parents, "Mia's bright, but she's not leadership material." I accepted, and when I walked into that conference room, microphone clipped to my blouse, and told a crowd of 400 people about building a company from the ashes of disappointment, I didn't think about revenge. I thought about liberation. Mine. And every other woman in the room still waiting to choose herself. But consequences, I've learned, always circle back. Just when I thought my past had finally stopped echoing, I got a phone call from my Uncle Robert. He rarely called me. Maybe twice in the last 10 years. But his voice was urgent. "Mia," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Are you aware your parents are trying to refinance the lake house?" I blinked. No. Why would I be? Well, they're doing it in a way that raises red flags. They listed assets that include a family equity account tied to your name. Does that sound right to you? My blood ran cold. A family equity account wasn't a thing. Unless my name was being used to leverage credibility, to inflate financials, to gain approval they might not qualify for otherwise. "They're trying to use me," I said slowly. Robert sighed. "I thought you should know. They're not being transparent. And frankly, they don't have a good track record." I thanked him, then hung up, and then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my parents to my mother answered. "Mia. Honey. We saw the article. Your speech. Oh my gosh, why are you using my name to get a loan?" Silence. Then a shift in her voice. Defensive. Familiar. "Sweetheart, it's just paperwork. You're listed as a beneficiary. Technically you're part of the family equity." No, my voice was calm. Controlled. "I'm not part of anything. Not legally. Not emotionally. Not financially. You do not have permission to use my name, credit, or professional reputation. Remove it. Now." "Mia, don't be dramatic." "I'm not. I'm being clear. If I see any use of my name again, I'll pursue legal action. I won't hesitate." My father's voice cut in from the background. "This isn't necessary. We're your parents." "No," I said. "You're just people I used to trust. And you've exhausted that privilege." Then I hung up, and I blocked the number. For the first time, there was no hesitation, and guilt, only peace, and the distant, growing echo of something much better than revenge. Power. I didn't grow up imagining I'd be someone people admired. I always assumed I'd be the one holding things together in the background, the good daughter, the careful planner, the one you forget to thank because you assume she doesn't need it. But somewhere between my parents' betrayal and the rise of Vesta, something in me mutated. Or maybe it evolved. I stopped craving approval and started chasing alignment, aligning with my values, my vision, and finally, my worth. And with each passing month, my world grew larger, while theirs stayed the same. By the end of October, Vesta was in national news. We had just closed our Series A round at $6.5 million. TechCrunch picked it up, then Forbes Women, then The Scheme. We were featured as one of the top 10 startups reshaping financial literacy for the next generation. I was named a finalist for the Women Founders Fellowship, and we had just secured a pilot program with 3 community colleges in the Midwest. IT was everything I had dreamed of, multiplied, and through it all, I remained silent where it mattered most. No call to my parents, no gloating emails to Jason, no Facebook status updates designed to spark curiosity. I didn't need to scream anymore. My success spoke fluently in a language they finally understood, reputation. But I did make one deliberate move, one quiet, brilliant move, and it started with Lila. She messaged me on LinkedIn. It was short, polite, and filled with the kind of tentative professionalism that made it clear she wasn't sure what version of me she was about to get. Hi Mia, I hope you don't mind me reaching out here. I wanted to say congratulations on Vesta's launch. I've followed the growth, it's really incredible. I know things with your family have been complicated, but I'd love to take you to coffee sometime if you're open to it. No pressure. Just a woman who admires your work and would love to connect outside the family tree. IT was the kind of message that didn't need decoding. She was reaching out to me, not as Jason's fiancé, not as my mother's future daughter-in-law, but as a woman trying to bridge a gap she hadn't created, and something about that softened me. I agreed. We met at a cafe in Wicker Park, far from the manicured suburbs where Jason and my parents still lived in their curated cul-de-sac of matching lawns and whispered gossip. Lila was even more striking in person, elegant, poised, with a quiet strength behind her words that reminded me of women who had learned to survive in difficult families by mastering diplomacy. Thank you for meeting me, she said, sipping her chai. I know you didn't have to. I know, I replied, matching her calm. So why did you ask? She smiled. Because I think we're more alike than you know. And because you intimidate the hell out of Jason. That made me laugh. It wasn't a small laugh either. It was genuine. And in that moment, I realized I had walked into this meeting with no guard. No armor. Just curiosity. I don't mean to intimidate him, I said. But I also don't go out of my way to make him comfortable anymore. Lila nodded. Good. He doesn't deserve that. Not yet. The honesty in her voice startled me. I leaned in slightly. You don't believe that he's changed narrative either? I believe he's trying, she said. But I also believe trying isn't the same as accountability. And honestly, if I hadn't met you and heard the other side, I might have walked into this marriage blind. I studied her. Why are you telling me this? Because I don't want to marry into a family built on silence and convenience. I want clarity and fairness. And I know Jason won't tell me the full truth. But I think you will. So I did, over coffee and croissants. I told her everything. Not to sabotage their relationship. Not to poison her view of the family. But because she deserved to know exactly who she was standing next to at the altar, and when I was done, she reached across the table and took my hand. I'm sorry, she said quietly. For what they did. For how long you had to carry it. You deserved better. No one in my family had ever said those words to me before. Not once. I don't think I realized how badly I needed to hear them until they were said by a near stranger, someone who had every reason to defend Jason but chose, instead, to stand in truth. We hugged before we left. She didn't say, we'll talk soon. She said, I'll keep you posted. 3 weeks later, I got an email. Subject line, confidential, Vesta opportunity? It was from one of Jason's old college friends, Mark, now a venture partner at a mid-tier investment group in New York. He congratulated me on the recent press and requested a conversation around future capital alignment. I read it twice. Then I read it again. IT didn't mention Jason. But the subtext was clear. Jason was talking about me, about Vesta, about doors he believed he could open, and that told me exactly what I needed to know. He still thought my success was negotiable. That was my cue, not to strike, but to shift. In December, we hosted Vesta's first investor and user appreciation summit. It was an intimate event, just 60 people at a boutique hotel ballroom in Chicago. Press, early users, mentors, and founders from the Accelerator Network. And yes, I invited Lila. I didn't invite Jason. She came alone. And when I introduced her to our board chair as A personal friend and one of the most quietly insightful women I've ever met. I saw something flicker in her eyes, recognition, that I wasn't just extending grace, I was offering a bridge. That night, she pulled me aside. "I have something to tell you," she said, lowering her voice. "Jason asked if you'd put in a good word for him with your investors. He's trying to get a pitch for a new app he wants to build." I blinked. "He what?" "He thinks if he can show traction with someone like you vouching for him, it'll carry weight." I told him not to ask, that it was inappropriate. But I think he's still planning to reach out. I looked at her carefully. "And what do you think I should do?" "I think you should do whatever protects your work," she said. "Whatever honors your boundary. And I think if he can't understand that, he shouldn't be in this industry." That's when I knew she wasn't just Jason's fiancée anymore. She was quietly, powerfully done with his illusions, just like me. A week later, I got the email from Jason. Subject: "Big idea, want your thoughts?" I didn't open it. I didn't need to, because he wasn't asking for my insight. He was asking for my clout. I responded with one sentence. "Jason, I wish you well, but I am not a resource for you. Nor will I endorse projects that do not align with my company's standards." He didn't reply. I assume he was shocked. I assume he told my parents. And I assume, somewhere deep in their pristine suburban house, someone said I was being cold. That I had changed. That I had forgotten where I came from. But the truth is, I remembered exactly where I came from. And I had no plans of going back. I wasn't interested in proving them wrong anymore. I was interested in continuing to prove myself right. The young woman who stayed up late studying finance while Jason was getting drunk in someone's dorm room. The daughter who helped her parents pay their mortgage after her first bonus check. The woman who lost everything she trusted and built something better from the rubble. I didn't destroy their place in my life. They handed me the wreckage and expected me to stay buried under it, but I didn't. I rose, and now they would watch, not from my stage, not from my table, but from the distance they created, wondering when I'd come back, and realizing at last I never would. By January, the narrative had shifted completely, and not just in the media or inside the Vesta office walls, but in the private, silent corners where resentment lives. You know the ones I mean. Family group chats that still exist, but no longer function. Cousins who stopped commenting. Aunts who see your name in a newspaper and message, "So proud of you, sweetheart," while conveniently forgetting that they sided with your parents when everything exploded. The lines were drawn now, not by me, but by the people who once assumed I would always pick up the phone, always show up, always say yes. I had become something they couldn't quite categorize anymore. I wasn't angry enough to be the bitter one. I wasn't quiet enough to be the black sheep. I wasn't flashy enough to be the sellout. I was successful and unapologetic. That made me dangerous, especially to people who only knew how to define power through controlled. It started subtly, a whisper from a former neighbor who told me my mother had started correcting people when they brought up the trust fund fiasco. Misunderstanding, she called it. "She's still part of the family," she insisted. Then came the phone calls I didn't answer. The voicemails I deleted. I never changed my number because, honestly, I didn't need to. I wasn't hiding. They were the ones who now operated in shadows, navigating the growing discomfort of realizing I was no longer their emotional insurance policy. Then something happened that confirmed everything I already suspected. I was invited to speak at a financial literacy conference hosted at my old university. My alma mater. The same place I once walked across a snow-covered campus with $30 in my checking account and dreams I barely said aloud. The keynote panel was on generational wealth, legacy, and financial independence. I was asked to sit beside two venture capitalists and a representative from one of the country's largest credit unions, and 2 rows from the front. In a pearl-button coat and red lipstick that hadn't changed since I was 16, sat my mother. Next to her was my father, stiff and unreadable. They had RSVP'd as community attendees. I hadn't invited them, and they didn't approach me before the panel began. But when I stood at that podium, looked down at the note cards I barely needed, and started my speech with the words, "I'm here today not because I had a smooth path, But because I had a reason to keep walking when everything I counted on was taken away, I didn't blink, I didn't look at them, I didn't need to, because I knew every word was being swallowed like glass. They sat through the entire event. Clapped at the end. Waited by the hallway as if we were going to play Happy Family again. I took photos with students, shook hands with faculty, accepted a bouquet from the program coordinator. Then I walked right past them and out into the snowy evening without a backward glance. IT wasn't cruelty. IT was clarity. They weren't my beginning anymore. They were just part of the middle I had outgrown. I thought that might be the end of it, that after seeing me on stage, untouchable, confident, wholly independent, they would finally retreat. Accept the boundary. But people who are used to power don't give it up quietly. The very next day, I received an email from a woman named Ruth DeLay. She was the new vice president of a regional financial institution, and apparently, my parents' former neighbor from their old town before we moved when I was 8. Ruth wrote me a glowing email, praising my work, asking to meet for lunch to discuss a potential brand alignment with her community initiative focused on young women and financial literacy. Did AT first? I didn't connect the dots. IT wasn't until we met for that lunch, just a quick midday meeting at a quiet cafe downtown, that the pieces started clicking. She was warm, poised, definitely a professional in her own right. But 10 minutes into our conversation, she shifted. She mentioned my parents, talked about the pain of watching families drift. And then she said it. Your mother speaks so highly of you, Ruth said, stirring her coffee gently. She still says she's hopeful you two will find your way back. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was so calculated. So I said, leaning in, "Did she send you?" Ruth blinked just once. "No," she said. "But I think she hoped you might be more receptive to hearing her name from someone else." There it was, a new strategy. They'd stopped trying directly. Now they were sending others to soften me, to make me question the reality I had already survived, to see if the guilt had started creeping back in. I ended the meeting politely. Told Ruth I appreciated the interest, but that I wasn't aligning Vesta with anything that wasn't internally initiated. I walked out with my head high, but inside, something was shifting again. They weren't giving up, not because they missed me, but because my success made their silence look ugly, and the more visible I became, the more invisible they felt in comparison. That's when the tension began to surface publicly, subtle at first. Jason's LinkedIn posts started referencing bootstrapping and building without a safety net, as if to counter the growing narrative around me. He even posted a photo of himself outside a WeWork building with the caption, "Nothing is handed to us. We build, we bleed, we become." I didn't respond. Claire saw it and texted me, "He's flailing." Then came a blog post on a small website, a local lifestyle magazine in the suburb where my parents still lived. The article was about community resilience and highlighted families who've overcome internal divides to find strength again. My mother was quoted. She talked about raising children who take different paths and how sometimes it's easy to forget that success without reconciliation can still leave wounds. It was thinly veiled, but the message was clear. They were trying to reclaim the narrative, to paint themselves as the ones who wanted peace, and me as the one who refused to pick up the phone. What they didn't realize is that I didn't care about the narrative anymore, because the truth doesn't need an audience. But then came the call I didn't expect. IT wasn't from my parents or Jason. IT was from my grandmother's lawyer, my mother's mother. She had passed away quietly in her sleep, peacefully, I was told. I hadn't seen her in years. She was always polite to me, always distant. But I remembered summers at her house as a child. I remembered her baking cinnamon scones and humming while she dusted her bookshelves. She was never cruel, just detached. The lawyer said she had left something for me, something separate from the estate division. I met him in his office 2 weeks later. He handed me a simple envelope and a thin folder. Inside the envelope was a letter, written in my grandmother's tidy cursive. "Mia, I don't know if this will reach you after I'm gone, but I hope it does. I want you to know that I watched everything, quietly, from afar. I watched you grow into a woman who did not flinch, even when life pushed you into a corner. I heard about what happened with your parents and Jason. I heard the whispers, the rationalizations, the rewriting of history, and I did not interfere. That is my shame. But now, in this final moment, I want to write at least one small piece of the balance. Enclosed is access to a property I bought in your name 20 years ago. I've maintained it, protected it, and kept it off the books. It is yours, unencumbered. Do with it what you wish. Live there, sell it, ignore it, but know that not everyone forgot who you were. Not everyone abandoned your side. Your strength was never invisible. It just scared the wrong people. Love. Grandmother Ruth. I sat in that office. Stunned. It wasn't the property. It wasn't even the money it represented. It was the fact that someone had seen me. Really seen me, and left me something, not out of obligation, not to fix something, but to honor something. I drove to the property the next day. It was a cottage in Wisconsin. Tiny. Rustic. On a lake. Inside, it smelled of cedar and old paper. Books still on the shelves. Blankets folded over the couch. It was like stepping into a memory I didn't know was mine. I stood in the doorway and whispered the only thing I'd never said out loud during this whole journey. I forgive you, not my grandmother, myself, for staying too long, for believing too much, for letting them steal what I can now build again. The strange thing about silence is how loud it becomes when people realize it won't break. For months, my family had operated in the background, pretending, posturing, and performing as though I hadn't rewritten every rule of our dynamic. They kept smiling in pictures. Jason kept posting about his startup hustle, though it was obvious to anyone in the industry he hadn't launched anything tangible. My mother kept up her social rounds, making vague comments about how both of her children were doing beautifully. But I never said a word. I didn't retaliate. I didn't go public with what they did to me. I didn't correct the story. That silence? It started to corner them because the longer I refused to play along, the more other people began asking questions. Not me, them. And slowly, quietly, the truth began to unspool. Without my help, IT started with an article. A local business blog had published a feature on rising stars in family-run ventures. Jason had apparently pitched his involvement in a new fintech product, a budgeting app called Fracture of all things. The irony wasn't lost on me. The write-up wasn't impressive. But the problem was that he had listed himself as a co-founder and advisor to early-stage development at Vesta Technologies. I stared at the screen, pulse slow and steadied. He had crossed a line. My name, my company, was not his to borrow. I forwarded the article to Claire. 10 minutes later, she was calling. He used your company in a lie, she said flatly. That's brand damage. We need to issue a statement. I know, I replied. But not yet. Claire paused. You want to wait? I do. I wasn't stalling out of fear. I was calculating. Jason had just bet his entire public credibility on a lie that could be disproven in 10 seconds. All I had to do was let the rope unravel itself, and it did because a week after that article went live, one of our new investors sent me a concerned email. Subject line: "This guy isn't affiliated with us, right?" Attached was a screenshot of an email Jason had sent to a small investment firm attempting to raise capital using Vesta's metrics. He had inflated our user base, our revenue model, and even mentioned our mentors, Claire included, as indirect advisors. I didn't need to yell, I didn't need to send threats. I just responded with a copy of our legal cease and desist, signed and dated, drafted by our corporate attorney months ago for just this kind of moment. The letter was clean, formal, devastating. Jason had 48 hours to retract every false claim or face legal action. He didn't reply directly. But I know he got it because the next day, the article disappeared. 2 days after that, the Fracture Project website was gone. 3 days later, Jason's LinkedIn was wiped, and no more co-founder. No more advisor titles. Just a generic placeholder job listing with no company name, and then came the email. From Jason, subject line: "Let's talk, please." It was short, hollow, defensive in its vagueness. I deleted it, not because I was above him, but because the only thing more powerful than a confrontation was indifference. And I wasn't interested in offering him the opportunity to center himself in my story again. I didn't tell Lila what happened. She had started sending me the occasional check-in message, never pushing, always warm. She and Jason were still engaged, though the wedding date kept getting pushed. She claimed it was logistics, but I didn't press. I had no desire to step between them, but the week after the LinkedIn purge, I received a text from her. "Hey, just wanted you to know I asked Jason about the article. He lied. You were right. I'm dealing with it." "I'm sorry," that was all she said, but it was enough, because in those few words, I could feel the ground shifting beneath Jason's feet. He wasn't just losing face professionally, he was losing credibility with the last person who still defended him. And I hadn't said a word to make it happen. Meanwhile, Vesta was exploding. BY March, we had closed another growth funding round, bringing our total raise to $10 million. We were onboarding institutional partners, city councils, university programs, even a few small banks that wanted to white label our technology for their female-first financial initiatives. We hired 10 more staff. I gave a TEDx talk. We got covered in Fast Company, and not once, did I hear a word from my parents. Not to congratulate me, not to ask for another chance, not to apologize, and the funny part? I was okay with that. Because I didn't need them to acknowledge my success anymore. Their silence was its own confession. But then came the call from someone unexpected. Tiffany, my cousin. The only extended family member who had stayed neutral throughout all the drama. We weren't close growing up, but she'd always treated me with respect. She had followed Vesta's journey online and even signed up for the beta app early. "Mia," she said, after we exchanged pleasantries. "I wanted to give you a heads up. Your mother, she's unraveling a little." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "She came to my mom's birthday party last weekend. Got a little tipsy. Started talking about how hard it is to have a daughter who wants nothing to do with you but is on the cover of every magazine." I exhaled slowly. Let me guess, she didn't mention the trust fund. "No," Tiffany said. "But she made it sound like you were the one who left without warning." "She's rewriting it, Mia. Fully. She's got people believing you just got successful and decided your family wasn't good enough anymore." I should have been furious, but all I felt was exhaustion. The woman who had raised me, the same one who used my trust to bail out her reckless son, was now painting herself as the abandoned one. That I laughed, just once. Not bitter, just tired. "Thanks for telling me," I said. "But it doesn't matter." Tiffany paused. "Doesn't it?" I knew what she was asking. She wanted to know if I was going to fight back. Set the record straight. Call my mother. Correct the story, but I didn't need to, because that version of the story wouldn't last. Not with everything that was coming. Not with what I was planning next. 2 weeks later, I announced Vesta's national tour. 10 cities. Financial literacy workshops. Live panels. Partnered with local organizations to bring real, free, in-person financial coaching to women across the country. IT wasn't just PR. IT was legacy, and our final stop, Chicago. My home city, the place where everything started. Where I lost what I thought I needed and found what I had all along. The event would be held in a renovated Art Deco theater downtown, complete with breakout rooms, childcare zones, networking spaces, and a press lounge. IT was a big deal. And the guest list? Every journalist, investor, and local influencer who had touched the Vesta story was invited, and so was Lila. I wasn't sure she'd come, but on the day of the event, as I stood near the stage reviewing my notes, I saw her walk through the doors in a black blazer and jeans. Her hair pulled back, her eyes calm. "Mia," she said, walking over. "Hey," I replied, offering a smile. "Didn't think you'd make it." I almost didn't. I waited. She looked around, took a breath, and then said, "I ended the engagement." My heart didn't race. My stomach didn't drop. I just nodded. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. She shrugged. "Don't be. You told me the truth. I just needed to see the rest of it unfold." Was it the article? It was the article. The LinkedIn lies. The way he refused to take responsibility for any of it. But mostly, It was realizing that I was about to marry into a story built on someone else's pain, and I didn't want to be part of that. We hugged. It wasn't long, but it meant everything, and when she stepped into the audience that night and listened to me speak, surrounded by hundreds of women who had been quietly underestimated, I knew we had both chosen the right ending. Not revenge. Not reconciliation, but liberation. The Chicago event marked a shift I didn't fully recognize until the following week. Something about standing on that stage, confident, composed, surrounded by the women we were building Vesta to serve, seemed to solidify the last piece of myself I had fought so long to reclaim. I was no longer waiting for closure. I wasn't watching the shadows for my parents to call or bracing for Jason to pull another stunt. I was free, not metaphorically, not emotionally, practically, functionally. Spiritually, I was no longer tethered to their shame, and that freedom, that inner stillness, is probably why I didn't flinch when the real fallout began. It came, not with a bang, but with a whisper. First, a friend from the investment circle texted me, "Hey, random. Do you know if Jason's still trying to pitch? He just showed up to our open pitch night claiming you mentored his project." We turned him away, but heads up, I stared at the message for a long moment. I wasn't surprised. Jason had always treated other people's reputations like chips in a poker game. Borrow, bluff, cash out. But now, the table had flipped. And he was out of cards. I replied simply, "Thanks for the heads up." I haven't spoken to him in months. Then I forgot about it because I had real things to focus on. We were gearing up to launch Vesta in 2 international pilot markets. I had a dozen interviews lined up, a podcast tour, and a feature story in a business magazine that didn't just cover my company, it covered me. My life, my rise, my family. They asked all the hard questions. And for the first time, I didn't dodge them, I didn't name names. I didn't turn the piece into a soap opera, but I told the truth. The journalist asked me, "What's the hardest part about succeeding on your own?" And I said, "It's not doing it alone. It's realizing the people who were supposed to protect you never actually planned to." That quote ran at the top of the article. Underneath was a photo of me, smiling in a soft gray suit, standing outside the Vesta offices, arms folded not in defiance, but in peace. It went viral. Not because it was scandalous. Because it was honest. It resonated with daughters who had been overlooked, sons who had been dismissed, partners who had poured themselves into people who never poured back. My inbox was flooded. I couldn't keep up. I asked my assistant to flag the notes from survivors of family estrangement, people who had walked away from emotional manipulation and chosen something better. They weren't looking for advice. They were just looking for someone who understood, and I did. Every single word. That week, something unexpected happened. I got a call from my mother's sister, my Aunt Monica. She was always the quiet one in the family. A nurse. Never married. She'd stayed close enough to observe the dysfunction, but far enough to not get drawn in. She hadn't reached out to me in over a year, but now here she was. Her name flashing across my phone screen like a glitch from the past. I answered. "Mia," she said. Her voice was shaky. "I'm sorry to call out of nowhere, but I think you should know what's going on." I waited. "It's Jason," she said. "He's been trying to get money. From everyone." My jaw didn't move. "What do you mean?" "He told your parents he needed help starting fresh. Said he wanted to buy a house with Lila before she broke things off. Said he'd been blacklisted from investment circles because of rumors." "He's blaming you." "Of course he was. He's asked for loans from your Uncle David, from me, from some of your dad's old coworkers. It's gotten desperate. And your parents. They're starting to turn on each other." I didn't respond. "Your dad," she continued, "told mine that this is all the price of raising a genius who thinks she's better than everyone else." "And your mom?" "She's telling people she just wants her family back. She cried at church last week. In front of everyone." I still didn't respond, not because I was heartless, but because none of this surprised me. They had built their entire image on the idea that Jason was the prodigy, the golden boy, the one worth sacrificing for, and now that he had nothing to show for it, And I was the one being asked to headline financial conferences. They didn't know how to cope with the inversion. They were unraveling because the story they had clung to was falling apart, and I hadn't laid a single hand on it. Aunt Monica sighed. I know you've made your decision. And I support that. But I wanted you to know, the mask is cracking. People are seeing it. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Thanks for telling me. I'm proud of you, Mia, she said. I hope you know that. I do, I said, and I meant it, but I also knew that pride wasn't the thing I had been chasing anymore. I wasn't trying to make anyone proud. I was trying to make myself hold. A week later, Claire and I were having lunch in our usual place. An airy bistro tucked in a downtown corner, quiet enough for real conversations. She was scrolling through her phone when she suddenly smirked. Did you see this? She asked. Turning her screen toward me at IT was a screenshot of a social media thread from a small investor forumed, a post titled, "Beware this guy. Misused company affiliation to scam for early-stage funding. Claiming to be connected to Vesta Technologies. Totally false." Jason's name was tagged. Multiple users chimed in. Apparently, he had tried to sell a data prototype as Vesta adjacent. He'd used my TEDx photo in a pitch deck. Told someone he was on good terms with the executive team. One investor even shared a redacted email where Jason claimed he was returning to his roots after a tough family rift caused by a manipulative female founder. Claire whistled. Bold move. I didn't blink. It's over, I said. She nodded. Yeah, it is. I didn't issue a statement. Didn't file a lawsuit. I didn't need to, because he had destroyed himself. All I had done was stop shielding him from the consequences, and that was all it took. That month, I went back to the cottage. The little lake house my grandmother had left me. It was early spring, the air still crisp enough to bite, but just warm enough to bring the thaw. I took a weekend off, no laptop, no team check-ins. Just me, a notebook, a stack of unread novels, and the sound of water slapping the shore. I sat on the porch that night, watching the stars. The same stars I'd stared at when I was a kid, dreaming of a life bigger than the one I was born into, and I felt something I hadn't in years. Relief. Not joy. Not vindication. Just peace. Jason had burned through every bridge, and why parents were finally being seen for who they were, without me lifting a single match. The fallout wasn't mine to clean up, it was theirs to live in, and me, I had nothing left to prove. Not to them. Not to the world. Not even to myself. When people talk about forgiveness, they make it sound like a moment, a single choice, a scene with soft music and some kind of emotional handshake that wraps things up cleanly, but it wasn't like that for me. It didn't come all at once. It came slowly, in pieces. It came in the mornings I woke up without dread. It came in the evenings when I sat on my porch, watching the sun melt into the lake, and didn't think about who I used to be. Forgiveness, it turned out, wasn't a performance. It was a quiet decision to stop letting someone else's choices write your story. The more space I created between myself and the people who hurt me, the more I saw them for who they really were, not as villains, not even as monsters. Just as people who made their choices and didn't think the consequences would matter, but they did, and the difference was, I let them matter. I didn't rewrite the story to make them comfortable. I didn't downplay what they did so I could sit at a holiday table and pretend. I let it be exactly what it was, and I moved on anyway. That was my forgiveness. It wasn't warmed. It wasn't affectionate. But it was real. It was a door that closed gently. Finally, in April, we launched Vesta 2.0. A fully redesigned platform, a new financial mentorship feature, and our first global pilot with a women's banking initiative in Ghana. We celebrated with a team retreat, 3 days in a mountain lodge, complete with a bonfire and team vision boards. That weekend, I looked around at the team I'd built. Designers, coders, marketers, partners. Women from every background, most of whom had been told at some point that they were too quiet, too intense, too emotional, too much. And yet here we were. Too much, and just enough to. I gave a speech that night. It wasn't planned. It wasn't even formal. We were sitting around the fire, everyone warm from wine and laughter, and someone said, Mia, Do you ever think about how far you've come? I did. So I stood up, held my glass, and said the only thing that felt true in that moment. I don't think I've come far, I said. I think I finally stopped going in circles. And that made all the difference. They applauded, they cried, but I didn't. Not because I wasn't emotional, but because I'd already cried all the tears I needed to cry, and now I was just here. Fully, present, powerful, unapologetically whole. Sometime that summer, I got a letter. Not an email, a letter, handwritten, from my father. I almost didn't open it. I let it sit on my desk for a week, unopened. Something about seeing his handwriting, familiar but distant, brought back too many memories I didn't need anymore. But eventually, I read IT. IT wasn't long. Mia, I don't expect a reply. I don't expect a reconciliation. But I needed to say that I'm sorry, not just for the money, not just for the lies, for the way we failed you. For choosing convenience over courage, for asking you to carry more than we ever acknowledged. You were always going to make it. We just didn't want to admit that you would make it without us. That was our fear, not your failure. I see that now. Your mother. She's struggling with it, but I think, in her own way, she's sorry too. I don't know if we'll ever fix it, but I hope someday you'll remember something good about us, even if it's small. Dottie read it twice. Then I folded it back up and put it in the drawer where I kept my passport, a flashlight, and the keys to the cottage. I didn't write back, not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing else to say. He was right. They had chosen fear. They had chosen the easy path, the golden child, the safe son, the image of control, and I had chosen truth. That IT had cost me a family, but it had given me myself, and I would make that trade again. Every time, that fall, I returned to my old neighborhood for the first time in over 2 years. Not for a reunion. Not for an event, just because I needed to see it. I parked near the corner of my old street and walked past the house I grew up in. The shutters were the same. The lawn a little less pristine. A different car in the driveway. IT felt smaller, not just the house. The entire street, like something I had outgrown without realizing it. I stood there for a while. I don't know what I was looking for, but eventually I turned and walked away. Not with sadness, not with longing, with a kind of quiet gratitude. This place had shaped me, but it no longer held me, and that was enough. Months later, during a panel Q&A at a business summit in New York, someone asked me, "What advice would you give to someone who feels abandoned by the people who were supposed to support them?" The room went stilled. I saw heads turn, phones lift to record, and I said what I wish someone had said to me: you don't need their permission to move forward. You don't need their apology to grow. If they couldn't see your value, that's not your deficiency. It's their limitation. Grieve it. Mourn it. But don't build your future waiting for them to come around. Build it because you deserve to arrive there, with or without them. Afterward, a woman in the front row came up to me in tears. She said, "I didn't know I was allowed to leave." I looked her in the eye. "You were always allowed," I said. "But it helps to see someone else walk first." These days, my life is quieter, not smaller, but quieter. We're preparing for Vesta's third launch cycle. We're in 5 countries now. We've partnered with 2 universities to embed our app into their first-year student orientation. Our team is thriving. I'm thriving. I'm dating again, slowly, carefully, but with joy. I cook dinner most nights. I go to therapy. I read books without guilt. I sleep deeply, sometimes. When I wake up in the morning and make coffee in the cottage's tiny kitchen, I wonder if the version of me who once sat sobbing on her apartment floor could see this life. I think she'd be proud, not because it's perfect, but because it's honest. It's mine, wholly, finally mine, and in the end, that's all I ever really wanted. Live a life I didn't have to explain or justified, a life where I didn't keep my brilliance tucked under someone else's comfort, a life that felt like freedom. I didn't destroy her. She did it to herself.